Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Star Trek Into Darkness. Now, prior to the 2009 Star Trek reboot slash prequel slash sequel thing, I had very little experience with Star Trek. I never watched any of the TV shows. I just couldn't get into them. I believe I saw the ending of Generations. I remembered the interactions between Kirk and Picard pretty clearly, but nothing else stood out. I did watch First Contact, which I actually remember really liking when it first came out on video, and I liked that so much that I went ahead and gave Insurrection a look, and I could not stand it at all. So that kind of killed Star Trek for me. But then the 2009 movie came out, and I really enjoyed it. I just thought it was very entertaining. It had a lot of action, a lot of good humor. I thought the characterizations were really well done, and the special effects were awesome. And it was just an all-around cool blockbuster film. Now, was it perfect? No. The lens flares were pretty distracting. I felt some of the action scenes were too tightly edited, and the camera work was very jittery. And the plot definitely had some holes, but I had fun, and that's what mattered. And I remember at the time a bunch of Star Trek fans actually complained, and that got the attention of the news for some reason. And they showed an article, and they used the term, or they said this 2009 Star Trek film was too entertaining. And I thought that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and it totally made me disrespect Trekkies all over the world. And since then, I've learned a lot about Star Trek and its effect on, just everybody, how its effect on our culture, what it was able to accomplish at that time. I never realized, how it was a big deal for them to, use all sorts of different races at that time. Remember that the show was initially, I think, made in the 60s, so that's very impressive. And I became more interested in the behind-the-scenes information, like how everybody hated William Shatner. And I became so intrigued by it that I figured, you know what, why not go ahead and give the show a chance? Whenever I did try to watch any of the TV series, if I ever did, I don't really remember. I was a kid, and I wasn't really into that kind of stuff. But I was always more of a Star Wars kind of guy. And so I went ahead and checked out the first Star Trek episode, and I really liked it. And I continued watching, and I'm not very far into the series. I think I'm like halfway through the first season, but I'm really getting into it. My plan is to finish the original series and just watch all the other series after that in a row. I didn't even realize that they continued making shows after Next Generation, Voyager, and I never heard about any of this. But I immediately understood where those Trekkies were coming from. I think they used the wrong word to describe their feelings. I think nobody should ever say something is too entertaining. I mean, entertaining is too subjective. I mean, that's just a sign that you liked it. You could be a totally slow-paced film, and or you could watch a film that's really slow-paced, and you could still find it to be entertaining if you liked it. But it is definitely a lot different from the 2009 movie. The 2009 movie is an action film that uses science fiction as its setting. Now, the original Star Trek show was a science fiction TV show. It was very low on action. It was much slower paced. And I guess I should clarify what it means. Science fiction as a genre is pretty much dead by today. Usually when you see the closest thing to it, it'll be something like Moon. But even then, most science fiction films tend to be hybrids now. Either they're science fiction slash horror or science fiction slash action. But during the 50s and 60s, it was actually very common to see pure-blooded science fiction films. These were very talky. There was a lot of dialogue. It was just about a lot of ideas. For example, one episode in the original Star Trek show was, what if man suddenly got the powers of a god? And they discussed that quite a bit. And that was the main, what dominated the running time of that episode was them discussing, the effects of this, the repercussions, the benefits, whatever. And it ended with an action scene, but for the most part, it was just talking throughout the rest of the show. The Day the Earth Stood Still was a good example of old-fashioned science fiction, or The Thing from Another Planet, or was it World? I can never remember the full title of that. 2001: A Space Odyssey. You don't see those kinds of movies anymore. So I could definitely see why an old-school Star Trek fan would not like the 2009 movie, because it's just not what they grew up with. It's action, not science fiction, and to them it probably seems like they're dumbing down the whole concept. So I now respect the Trekkies for what they feel about that. Now that doesn't change my feelings. I enjoyed the 2009 movie all the same. So now we come to Into Darkness, which I was really looking forward to. But the last time I was really looking forward to something, it totally backfired. Iron Man 3. But I went ahead and went into Darkness expecting at least a movie that was just as good as the first film, and I thought it was better. This was what Iron Man 3 should have been. Well, everything that you liked about the first film makes its return here. The action scenes are really good. In fact, I'd even say that they're better because the editing is not as tightly wound up and the camera work isn't as jittery. I'm not saying like it's a lot better in terms of the action, but I did think the action scenes were they flowed a little bit more nicely than the first film did. The special effects are flawless, and they actually show a little bit more of the Star Trek world. One of the things I actually did not like about the first, or I'm just going to say the first one, even though it's not technically the first Star Trek movie, is that it really, for the most part, just took place inside a ship. I mean, every once in a while they'd leave and go to a planet, but they never really showed a lot of those planets. And I mean, when you have a world like this where there's so many possibilities, it's almost anticlimactic to just take place inside a frickin' ship. But here they do a little bit more exploring. The film opens on another planet that's kind of like Avatar, where everything's there's a lot of vivid colors, and it's very over the top, but also appealing aesthetically. They show a little bit more of Earth, and I thought that was pretty neat. And they even go to the Klingon homeworld, which was pretty cool too. Most of the screen time definitely takes place aboard the Enterprise, but still, it's a step in the right direction. What else can I really say about that? In terms of spectacle, it was everything that I wanted to. But also, I thought the characterizations were a lot of fun. There's still a lot of comedy, and I thought the first movie, once again I'm saying the first movie, even though it wasn't technically the first movie, I thought it was funny, but I could see why certain people wouldn't agree with me. It was definitely very silly in parts. Here, I think it's just as funny, but it's not as silly. They toned down some of the mugging and stuff like that, so it's not as heavy-handed with the comedy, but I did constantly laugh throughout the duration of this film. So that was good. The acting is good for the most part, but I will admit that now that I've seen this show, I can find things that I can criticize. Some of the performances do borderline on imitation. For example, Carl Urban as Bones. I can't think of the original actor's name, but he is trying way too hard to be like this guy, and it doesn't seem quite as natural. But at the same time, Carl Urban is so entertaining that I didn't care. Actually, in some ways, he's my favorite character in this whole movie. So I loved him all the same. But even then, I could, like, for example, Chris Pine as Kirk. He doesn't really strike me as the same character from the original series. Even though it's supposed to be during his earlier days where he was a lot younger and not as mature, I still don't really see how he's going to develop into Kirk played by William Shatner. I could be wrong about that. Maybe I haven't seen enough episodes to really say that, but that's just what I feel. But once again, at the same time, Chris Pine is so entertaining and Kirk is so entertaining because of him that I don't really care all that much. Really, the worst one is probably Uhura. I think the actress who plays her in this movie does really good, and she gets quite a bit to do, but at the same time, she doesn't act anything like the original Uhura. So I'm not really sure why they went in that direction. But still, even when they're doing that, when they're not acting like the characters enough, or they're acting like them too much, I guess I'm kind of a hypocrite for criticizing that. They were all a lot of fun, and I enjoyed them. And fans should be happy that everybody I thought was used very adequately. Whether you're Scotty or Chekhov, everybody I thought had a significant amount of screen time, and they had a lot of impact on the plot too, or an action scene. It's not just the big three. So that was good, but I think what really made this much better than the first film is just the plot. Now, the plot in the previous film, it wasn't bad, but for the most part, it was maybe a bit too ambitious for its own good. Honestly, I felt the story was only there to give the characters, quite a bit to do in terms of just their interactions. It would provide an action scene quite often, a lot of special effects, but the story in itself I just didn't think was very compelling. It had all this nonsense involving time travel and blowing up planets, and I had some difficulty buying a lot of this stuff. But here it's much more scaled down, it's much more simplified, but that doesn't make it any less compelling. Pretty much the setup is this terrorist named John Harrison. He attacks Starfleet, and Kirk decides he's going to hunt him down. And but it goes into much more epic territory from there. And I like how the story developed, and that's why I think the big difference between this and the first one is I couldn't give a shit about where the story was going in the first film. I was enjoying everything else. I was just going along with the ride, but I mean, when they revealed why the characters were doing this and that, I really didn't care. But here, whenever they'd reveal something, I was like, oh shit, that's kind of cool. And I was concerned that maybe the trailers were lying, just like how Iron Man 3's trailers did. And even though it's not quite what you see from the trailers, I still got what I wanted out of it. And even when it went in a direction that I wasn't expecting, I always liked where it was going. And, I liked how the plot developed. And that, to me, was really this film's main anchor, is I enjoyed the story. And I thought the villain was really good. I'm not going to spoil who it is, just because it becomes ambiguous as to whether John Harrison is actually the villain. Whether he is or not, you'll just have to see the movie yourself. But once again, I just found the story and the characters just that much more interesting, and that's what made Star Trek Into Darkness better. Now, was it perfect? No, there's still some lens flare problems. I don't know why J.J. Abrams is whoring that out so much. At least they weren't as prominent during the action scenes, but during a lot of the sequences where people are just sitting around and talking, suddenly a lens flare would be really distracting. Will just come out of nowhere and just you're like, why? But the third act has gotten some criticism, and I agree. It's not that the third act is bad, it's just not as exceptional as the rest of the movie. It seems kind of like a generic action flick ending. But otherwise, I didn't have a major issue with that. I just thought the ending could have been better, but it wasn't bad. So that's really all I have to say. I did not do a written review of this. I did do written reviews of Dragon, a Donnie Yen movie, Outpost, and Nazi ghost movie, I guess I'd describe it as. And I plan on doing a written review of something tomorrow. We'll just have to see. I do hope that I'm going to be releasing a review memoirs today, actually. I'm not going to have time for critiquing the critics, so I apologize for that. But I guess back to Star Trek, sorry. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. If you liked the first film, I'd say that this is worth the full price. If you were on the fence of the first film, it depends on how on the fence you were. I'd say it's at least worth a rental, but I even go matinee. But if you didn't like the first film, I don't know if this is good enough to really warrant your time or money. So it's just up to you. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and all that jazz. I'm about to move. I'm going to be absent throughout most of this week, so please be patient. I'll see you guys later.